Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about the last part of agriculture and food production, sustainable agriculture. What are the goals? What does it look like? How can you contribute as an individual to sustainable food production in the United States and the world? So the goal of sustainable farming is to feed the world's population without destroying the land, polluting the environment, or reducing biodiversity. Right? We want to be able to produce food for the whole world indefinitely. We don't want to have to destroy the habitat in the process. And there's no single approach or solution. This is going to be true for any problem in environmental science. We need multifaceted approaches. We need to think about things from multiple different angles and try a lot of different solutions. It's not going to be a silver bullet. We need to look at soil conservation, water conservation, meat production, you name it. So in terms of soil conservation, first of all, we need to prevent erosion. And there are a variety of ways we can do that. By contour plowing, you're plowing along sort of the gradients and contours of the land, which is going to help reduce erosion. Another example similar to that is terracing, where you sort of make this stepwise plow that you do on the side of a hill. We see this a lot in like the Andes in South America. And this is also going to help reduce erosion because you're not geoforming, you're not modifying the landscape to an intense degree. Planting windbreaks next to your farms, just rows of trees, bushes, some sort of large plants can help buffet the wind and stop the wind from picking up a lot of the nutrients and sediment out of the topsoil and eroding it away. So this is going to help reduce erosion. It can also help reduce runoff and erosion from water and rain. By these windbreaks can actually absorb a lot of that excess water and nutrients that might be running off from these fields. Additionally, by planting perennial crops, we can reduce the amount of plowing that is needed. So perennial crops are crops that grow back every year, right? Many crops like corn, you plant it, you harvest it, it dies, you have to replant it the next year. But for things like grapes or an apple tree or artichokes, you plant it once and you harvest it, and the next year it will produce again. And the next year it will produce again. So you don't have to keep replanting it. It will regrow every year, and that means you don't have to keep plowing every year, which is going to reduce erosion. Additionally, we can look at something called no-till agriculture. Tilling in agriculture, in farming, is the idea of you're dragging a plow behind a tractor or an ox, and you're breaking up this soil, you're splitting it open, you're churning it open, and that can kill a lot of the soil biota, the bacteria that live in there. It can also expose the soil to air and water, increasing erosion. No-till agriculture is exactly what it sounds like, right? You are not tilling the soil, you're not plowing it, you're just planting your next crop within the remains of the previous crop. So in this case, we've got soybeans growing among the husks and shells and stuff of corn stalks. And this is going to have a couple benefits. One, it's going to decrease erosion because these the remnants of the previous crop are blocking the wind from eroding the soil. They're protecting the soil, and it also means there's going to be less decomposition and less production of CO2. One of the downsides, though, is that you've got more weeds growing in this area because it's less micromanaged, and so you might have to use more herbicides. And lastly, we could do something called strip cropping or intercropping, which is this idea where you grow two different crops in the same field next to one another, and that's going to make the root system of the soil more diverse, because you've got two different species with two different types of roots. That's going to help strengthen the biodiversity of the soil in terms of its root structure and help it prevent erosion. And it's also going to help maintain soil fertility. For example, corn, pictured here, requires a lot of nitrogen, whereas peas are a legume. They have nitrogen-fixing bacteria on their roots, and so they can actually provide a lot of nitrogen for that soil, so they kind of they end up having a little partnership going on here. And that is actually an example of improving soil fertility. Intercropping, in some cases you can even do crop rotation, where you plant a bunch of nitrogen fixers, you harvest them, and then the next crop you plant a bunch of root crops. And then the next one you plant a bunch of fruits, and then the next harvest you plant a bunch of leaves. Rather than planting corn, and then corn, and then corn, and then corn, this is going to reduce the demands of one specific crop on the soil. It's going to help increase the fertility of the soil by, each plant is going to give something different and take something different from the soil. So having a lot of different plants, high biodiversity, is going to help maintain soil fertility and improve it in many cases. Additionally, you can use green manure, which is just animal or plant waste, or you can use compost, which is just decomposing food waste to fertilize your ground rather than using synthetic fertilizer. And compost is great because it reduces food waste and it helps fertilize your crops. So definitely worth shifting in that direction. Another one is limestone. We talked about limestone in Unit 4. Limestone can be used to reduce the acidity of a soil. And if the soil is too acidic, plants won't be able to take in those nutrients, right? If it's too acidic or too basic. So by having a just right neutrality in terms of the pH for the soil, the plants will actually absorb the nutrients that you are working so hard to get into the soil. It would be a shame if you used all this compost and crop rotation and the plants couldn't absorb it because the soil was too fertile, too acidic, sorry. We also need to think about water conservation. We talked about how drip irrigation uses substantially less water and leads to less water waste, but you can also do things like irrigating your fields with gray water. Gray water is wastewater that doesn't have any sewage contamination. So water from your bathtub, your sink, your washing machine, your dishwasher, all of those things, that's wastewater, but it doesn't have any fecal matter in it. So you can actually filter it out and use it to water your crops or your garden. You can also catch rain, use the roof of your house to collect rain in barrels or tanks and use that to irrigate your crops, or even something as simple as just a bucket next to your gutter, and then you use that to fill your watering can for your garden. Can actually save a lot of water that way. And lastly, we need to think about meat production, right? Moving away from CAFOs and towards free-range grazing, looking at building farms with multi-species involved at the same process. I'll show you an example of that in a second. And also reducing our meat consumption. I've talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. If you think this burger looks delicious, guess what? It's not even meat. It's a Beyond Burger. So please consider reducing your consumption, at least of red meat, and maybe even all meat, and going vegetarian. So one thing that you can do for meat production is rotational grazing. I talked about this a little bit in the last video, but this is going to help spread out the manure of the cows so they're not all pooping in one place and creating nutrient overload. It's going to reduce overgrazing in one area, so that way when these cows move over to this pasture on the right, this grass can actually have a chance to grow back. It hasn't been totally grazed into oblivion. It's going to increase the drought resistance of the land, and it's also going to reduce compaction of the soil, which is good for soil conservation. An example of multi-species farming, which I just mentioned, is Sylvanaqua Farm in Virginia, just outside of DC, started by Chris Newman. And what he uses is he's got pigs in the forest, and he's got cows and chickens on the same field. You see cows here and chickens in these little huts. And what will happen is the cattle will graze on the grass, that should say grass, whoops, and they will poop on the grass, adding natural fertilizer. Then he drags these pens behind, and the chickens are in the pens. He'll let them out sometimes, and they will help. They will actually pick away and scrape at the manure, and they will eat out parasites and maggots, which helps prevent diseases and parasites from breaking out, but it also helps incorporate the manure into the soil. All the while, these animals are getting a grass-fed diet, which is better for them, and they're also getting a lot more exercise because it's free range, so they're building more muscle that way. And this is also going to help promote the growth of grass faster, so you can rotate them back and forth pretty quickly, which also helps absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, reducing climate change. So you might be wondering, well, I shop at Whole Foods. I eat organic produce. That's sustainable, right? Thanks, Jeff. I mean, Whole Foods has got a green logo. How much more sustainable could it get than that? Well, organic isn't necessarily the same thing as sustainable, unfortunately. Organic is a very specific term in the United States that means this very specific thing, and that's not always sustainable. In order for something to be organic in the United States, can't use GMOs, can't use synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. There's no real evidence that this is any healthier than conventional farming. The cost of labor for organic produce is a lot higher, but you can sell the foods at a premium, so there is an economic market for it. And like I said, organic doesn't necessarily mean sustainable. It does usually require more land, especially if you're doing livestock because you're free-range grazing as opposed to CAFOs. It tends to use less energy because and sometimes they use renewable energy. It promotes healthier soil, but it has similar greenhouse gas emissions, believe it or not, to a traditional conventional farm. So instead, what you really should be doing, it's also got similar yields. So, Instead, what you should really be doing is focusing on what you eat and who it's coming from, where it's coming from, as opposed to how it was grown necessarily, right? Are you eating a lot of red meat, or are you eating more vegetables? That's going to have a big impact. And where is your produce coming from? Is it coming from some farm in California that needs to get shipped all the way across here, spending fossil fuels to fly it across the country? Or are you buying locally sourced produce from farmers that you trust who know use sustainable methods? And this is the way to go, right? So we really want to focus on, like I said, buying less meat and more vegetables, produce that is in season, right? Because if you're buying produce, if you're buying pumpkins in the springtime, they're out of season. So a lot of extra energy and resources need to be put into growing produce that is not in season. So by growing produce that is in season and grown locally, you are decreasing your footprint, especially if it's local, because they don't have to pay transportation costs. And by going to farmers markets in the spring, summer, fall, you can meet farmers and buy their products, try their products, and see how are they raising their meat, how are they growing their crops. Is this sustainable? Is this a business that I want to support? And ultimately, you're supporting a local small business as well, and that's great for the community. A great example of this is Versailles Farm, located in Greenwich, Connecticut. You might be surprised if you learn there are farms in Connecticut. It's quite small, but they use integrated pest management, no chemical pesticides. They actually use physical barriers to prevent pests from getting at their crops. They don't use a lot of machines, reducing soil compaction and fossil fuel emissions. They plant cover crops. So if they are done harvesting, rather than just leaving the field open, exposed to erosion, they'll plant a cover crop, maybe like a grass or wheat or something like that, to help maintain soil structure. They use green manure and compost to fertilize their soil, and they have a big emphasis on soil health. So it's worth checking out. Maybe you can patronize them and support a local business and feel good about doing it and supporting sustainable farming. So the question then becomes, okay, can we scale this up? Like, this farm is not very big, it's like 6 acres or something like that. Can we scale that up to the whole world? By 2100, we're going to have 11 billion people. We're running out of phosphorus. It's a limited resource found in rocks that's required for fertilizer. We're running out of arable land. A lot of the land is already being farmed on, and a lot of the soil on that land is being degraded. There are water shortages all around the world. California, the breadbasket of the United States, is having the biggest drought ever. And there's tons of food waste all around the world, particularly in the United States. So how can we possibly scale up sustainable agriculture? Well, I'm here to tell you that we can do it. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it. I'm going to skip this. The first thing we need to do sustainable agriculture for the whole world is we need to stop expanding the land that we use for agriculture. Almost 40% of all ice-free land on the Earth's surface is used for agriculture, with more than half of that being used just for pasture for cows, right? We need to stop the growth of that footprint immediately. Stop habitat destruction, fragmentation, slash and burn of the rainforest, etc. And instead, focus on improving the yields of the land that we're already using through technology, genetically modified organisms, vertical farming, which is this hot new trend that reduces the footprint of the farm, the physical footprint, because you're growing up as opposed to out, right? It's like you can fit way more people in a high-rise skyscraper than you can in a one-story building. And also by focusing on younger farms in developing countries, these farms often don't have the resources or the experience to increase their yields, whereas a country like the United States has been farming for a while, lots of wealth, has pretty much maximized its yields. So if we can take our resources and money and invest those into other places, we can help improve their yields too. Here's an example of an agricultural startup named Plenty using vertical farming to decrease their land footprint, less than 99% less land used, but much higher yields. They don't use pesticides. They can target their fertilizer. They use renewable energy. They can grow year-round. They recycle their water, and they're located in the city, so they don't really have to pay a lot for transportation costs. Really cool example. We also need to change our habits in terms of the resources we use: soil, land, water, fertilizer. We need to be focused on conserving those resources and not using them willy-nilly without thinking about, our waste. We need to change our diet. We need to eat less red meat, eat less meat overall. 36% of all crops grown feed livestock. If we fed those crops to humans, we could feed another 1 to 2 billion people. And as nations develop, they tend to be more reliant on meat. Meat is a luxury food. And so if we can make this change, this shift before some of these countries make that jump, we can dramatically reduce the demand for meat. And lastly, we need to reduce food waste. In the United States, 40% of all food is wasted, with over 110 kilograms of food waste per person per year. 25% of all calories produced on Earth are wasted. 50% of all food on Earth by weight is wasted. This is a massive problem. And you might be wondering, how is it possible that we're wasting so much food, but there's still people in the United States and all over the world who don't have food, who are starving, right? Malnutrition. And the key is not, is there food? The key is access to food. What's the point of doing all this sustainable agriculture if there isn't equitable access to the food? And this is a huge component of sustainable agriculture and also social and environmental justice in the world today. Food access is a big issue. In some places, it's harder to find affordable food that is also healthy and meets your dietary needs. In some places, it's hard to find food at all. And this is a term we describe as food security, when people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life, they are food secure. If they have both physical and economic access to food, right, they need to be able to get to that food physically, and they actually need to be able to afford it. And food insecurity, which is the opposite of that, is a pretty big problem in the United States. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, almost 11% of households were food insecure. That's 35 million Americans who did not have regular, sufficient, safe, nutritious access to food, whether physically or economically. When the pandemic hit, those numbers doubled. So we have about 70 million Americans. And there are about 330 in the country. So 70 out of 330, that's over 1/5. So over 20% of the country are food insecure at one point or another during the year, right? And it's not just everybody, right? We see lines of food insecurity in terms of where you live, urban versus rural, your gender, your wealth, and also your race. 19% of black households were food insecure. 15.6% of Hispanic households are food insecure, whereas only 7.9% of white households were food insecure. And you can see that in this graph here. This is a pretty substantial problem, and the roots of this issue go pretty far back in the United States history, looking at racially discriminatory policies and the racial wealth gap. But it can lead to some pretty substantial problems, one of which is a food desert, right? Which is basically this area with really, really high food insecurity. And what that means is that often the only food that's available are fast food restaurants or going to a convenience store, which means you're buying a lot of processed unhealthy food, which can lead to diseases like diabetes and obesity. And in 2010, almost 24 million people in the United States were in a food desert, which means that they lived more than a mile from a supermarket in an urban area or a suburban area, and more than 10 miles from a supermarket in a rural area, oftentimes without access to a car. And what that means is people living in rural areas are going to be hit the hardest. If we look at this map shows the percentage of people who have no car and no supermarket within a mile. And the darker the color, the more people fit this criteria. So you can see in some areas of the United States, more than 10% of people don't have a car and there's no supermarket within a mile of where they live, which means they got to take public transportation or they have to walk to a supermarket and somehow need to get all the food that they need back to their house. That's not easy. And it's a huge problem that we're going to have to reckon when we think about sustainable agriculture, because we can have all the vertical farms and all of the intercropping that we can think of, but if we can't distribute that food to all the people in the United States and the world, what good is it going to do? We'll talk more about this in class next time. Let me know if you've got questions. Otherwise, I will see you then.